Hello, hello. I think I'm live. Hello, Garland Nixon here, live on Sunday. Plenty to talk about. I'm going to talk about neoliberalism. I'm going to talk about neoconservatism, capitalism, all of those words, what they mean, where we are now. How do we understand this crazy and broken system? Let's talk. Hello, Garland here. And since it's Sunday and people are busy, and I don't think there'll be a lot of people on, who knows, it's Mother's Day in the US. People are celebrating that. So I just figured I'm up, I'm about a great Sunday afternoon to just chat and give my thoughts on some various terms, because what we're talking about now is definitions, what we think they are versus what they are. So let's start with neoliberalism, capitalism, conservatism. And good morning, Coop W. And don't forget, I am on Rockfin. For everybody, I'm going to share. I'm going to share. I'm going to share. For anybody that wants to watch me on, um, there we go. For anybody that's available, please click on the Rockfin and go over there. I think that'll get you. I'm pretty sure that'll get you there. Let me see. Let me see. Share. Oh, there we go. Copy. Okay, let me try this, see if it's the same thing. I'm going to share it there. We're going to talk about it. There we go. Okay, I think that's it. That's what we need to do. The other one was creating my stream, and I don't think you want to create my stream. So there you go. That's how you can find. That's how you can click and go right over to Rockfin right now. We got a couple people watching, so that's a good thing. So let's talk about it. Where to start? Let's start with capitalism, right? Because there's a big discussion. You know, the discussion is always things like that: capitalism, socialism. One thing I discovered years ago is that terms can mean different things to different people. So it's not what capitalism is, in the broadest sense. It's what it means to you. I think capitalism, in the broadest sense, kind of means this. It kind of means that if an economic system is organized around profits, basically, if an economic system is organized around corporations, companies, people, etc., seeking the maximum profits that they can get, that somehow, and I use that term somehow, we've heard, like, we're like the invisible hand of the market, which implies some, we don't know, that somehow um everything will work out great, that it'll work out best for everybody, right? If a system is, or economic system is, organized around the highest possible profits, and everybody seeking their own um gratification, economic, particularly gratification, that everything will work out fine. Now, I'll say this, and this is not a pro or anti-capitalism rant. It's just trying to figure out and understand it, right? It also kind of implies, there's, with the when you discuss the system of capitalism, there's something that's implied there. It is implied that the system isn't rigged, right? You've heard of the American dream. The American dream is intertwined with the belief that capitalism is the best economic system, and that capitalism is not a rigged system, right? That capitalism is a system, that it's open. We've heard of the free market. Again, the free market implies that it's not rigged, that everybody will work out everybody's working out to try to make as much as they can and get a great profit, and that within the context of an unrigged system, that'll somehow work. Right now, here's what I would say: I don't know if that's true or not, but I can tell you right now, that ain't what we've got. So the discussion of capitalism versus socialism right now is a false discussion, because it implies that capitalism, that the system that we have now is capitalism as we understood it in 1950 and 1960 and 1970, right? As we understood it then. Understood it. It wasn't even true then. So I think the problem we have in discussing capitalism, socialism, and various um, economic systems is that we're discussing something that isn't real. In order to, I hope I can remember the name of this book. But in order to be in the Matrix, to be in the movie, you had to read 3 books, and I'm trying to remember of them as we talk. One of them was called, here's what we call it. I think it was by Baudrillard, called Simulacra and Simulacrum, right? And what it was discussing is, a big part of what it was discussing is, if you try to recreate something, you have something that exists and you try to recreate it, right? But what if you're trying to recreate something that you think existed that never really existed in the first place, right? Simulacrum. So what if you're trying to simulate something that was never real in the first place, that never existed? Let's say, for instance, you have schizophrenia, and in your mind you believe that at one time something was so in the world, but it never was. You're the only person that believes there because you have this mental illness, and you try to recreate it, but it never existed. So what are you doing now? What are you creating, right? And if you notice, there was a discussion in the movie The Matrix, and part of the discussion was, and this is going to be a philosophical philosophical discussion video, but I'd like to do philosophy too. At any rate, so if you remember The Matrix, one of the discussions they were having was about food that they like. So they're in the Matrix, they're in this computer world, and they're eating whatever. And one of the guys says, "This is good. This is chicken. I love chicken." And one of the guys brings up, "But what if, when the machines created this taste for us in this computer world, what if they got it wrong? What if we like it, but what we think is chicken really tastes like tuna or steak? And we like it, but this is never the original flavor. So we really say when we like chicken, in reality, we're saying we like the taste of something, but in the real world, before the Matrix, that was the taste of steak or maybe even ice cream, right?" Again, that's that simulacra versus simulacrum. What if you're recreating something and you got it wrong, or recreating something that never existed? What if the machines in the Matrix didn't have any concept of what taste was? So they just looked at the human mind and they just determined this is what we're going to make taste. And then they just created various things. And it wasn't relevant to anything in the real world before the Matrix, right? That's the discussion that I think is valid when it comes to um, capitalism. In reality, let's say we look at the 50s, let's say we look at the 60s in the United States from the view of a person in the US, right? If you were some people in the US, you had a lot of opportunities. You got out of high school, you could get a good job at the mill, at the steel mill, at the building, to making cars, whatever, right? There was industry. You could get jobs that were in that industry. You could make a good living. The one person working, the wife and kids didn't, work. You had 2 cars. You had all of these things that you could make off a salary. Salaries were higher. Cost of living was lower. All of these things. So you saw that as positive. But so you say that's a capitalism that we would like to recreate, a capitalism that brings you prosperity. However, if you do a closer examination of that time period, you will start to realize something. One of the things that the United States was doing at that time in Africa, in South America, in Asia, right? If there was a part of the world where the US needed bananas, coffee beans, uranium, various resources, right? In some of these places, we called it third world, but in reality, there was no third, first, or second world. When we talked about the third world, I don't know if I'm gonna get far past capitalism or I'll be here all evening, but these are important things to talk about. When we referred to Africa or South America, Latin America as third world, what we implied and the message that was given to the American people and the people in the West was, it was the nature of things that created poverty in these countries, that they were impoverished because they were mentally, intellectually, and culturally inferior to us. So we were intellectually superior to them, that therefore our economies were stronger and we lived a better life. They were intellectually and culturally inferior to us, so they remained poor. And we purchased resources from them in a fair manner. And we had a strong economy. That was the implication. In truth, when we start to look back in history, whether it was bananas, coffee, cacao, various metals, gold, diamonds, whatever the case may be, it was all a fraud. We robbed these people blind. We overthrew their governments. When a government, Salvador Allende, Kwame Nkrumah, whoever the case may be, right? Thomas Sankara, when a leader would arise up in any of those countries that the people in the countries wanted, that said we should be independent from the United States empire and we should maybe nationalize our resources and sell them and keep the money for our own people, things of that nature, which they had a right to do as sovereign nations. When those things happen, the United States would overthrow the government and put in some kind of a crazy dictator that would, again, we could extricate all of their resources very cheaply and pay those people nothing and only give a few dollars to the top 1% that was very corrupt and bought off so we could rob those countries. So here's my point. Even when we thought that capitalism as it is now was strong, what we call capitalism, I'm going to use that word, what we call capitalism, even when we thought it was effective and strong, in reality, there was an immoral and unethical, and one might call Darwinian, in that we had the biggest bomb so we could take your stuff. In the world of fangs and claws, we got bigger fangs and claws so we can take your resources and kill you if you don't like it and overthrow your leader. So even while there was the appearance of a capitalism that created peace and prosperity in the Western world, it created some level of prosperity. But in the global South, it was founded on abuse and murder and theft of resources and overthrowing of governments and all of these bad things. And we made all of these people suffer and we stole their goods. So in truth, we have to ask ourselves, if in fact the system had been of capitalism, as we say, had been applied along with a recognition of sovereignty of the various countries in the global South, would the US and NATO have been able to live as high on the hog, been able to do the things that we would, because we wouldn't have gotten the resources as cheaply, because we'd had to pay a fair price to these countries to get cheap resources. So historically speaking, I'm not to say this is not an argument for or against capitalism, neoconservatism, or neoliberalism. I have my own thoughts on them, but I will throw the information out as I think and let you decide on your own what you think about it. Once again, I'm going to continue to put in I'm going to continue to put in, hopefully, there we go, the Rockfin stream destination in the comments, and I'm asking people to click on that. I'm trying to get as many people to go over to Rockfin as possible. I'm trying to get as many people to join and subscribe to my page over on Rockfin. Again, you never know when they're going to toss me, so we want to be straight there. We want to be good there. So the bottom line is, at the time that there was the appearance of effective capitalism bringing prosperity in the United States, there was a tremendous amount of economic and military abuse by the United States. So, and might I add this, and this is important when we talk about neoliberalism and neoconservatism, etc. If you have an economic system and you are an expansionist country like the U.S. empire has been expanding, right? Taking more countries, taking more societies, taking more, reaching out, reaching more, right? Then your foreign policy, your military policy, your expansionist policy is an expression of your economic policy. And one might argue to also an expression of your cultural policy, right? What is it right to do? What is it wrong to do? And how do you have a foreign policy based on the theft of resources and based on thwarting independence and sovereignty in other nations, and convince your population that you're doing the opposite, right? And that's when we start getting into neoliberalism and woke culture and things of that nature. And that is, how do you go around the world stealing other people's resources, murdering their leaders, um, thwarting independence and sovereignty of other nations, and convince your internal population at the heart of the empire that you're doing the opposite, that you're looking out, that you're the good guys, and that you're looking out for the little guy around the world. That's woke culture right there. That's the big part of woke culture. Convincing your people that it's in our best interest, that we're doing the right thing by telling everybody else what to do because we're looking out for the little guy and the oppressed. Okay, so you should see now that my position is that what we referred to as, when Make America Great Again, right? MAGA, Make America Great Again, right? Which is kind of what Biden's, just a different variety of that, right? That implies that you're going back to a time when things are good. Make America great, right? When things were great, right? It's an excellent slogan, albeit it's a great slogan, to be quite frank. People come up with these slogans. They're very, very powerful. And so it implies that there was a time when things were great and we're going to return to those times. Again, the book by Baudrillard, Simulacra and Simulacrum. You're going to create something, recreate something that, if you really dig into it, never really existed. A time when our economic, our cultural, and our foreign policy system worked well for everybody and everybody was happy. Well, we can already know that the people in the global South weren't happy because we were oppressing them and taking their resources. At the same time, there was cultural issues here, right? Because let's face it, 1950s, 60s Black people, as and a lot of minorities, as Martin Luther King said, they were an island of poverty and a sea of wealth. The entire system has turned inside out, to be quite honest. So now what we have is an island of wealth and a sea of poverty. But Black people were very, very poor. Black people didn't really have any rights. A lot of places they couldn't vote. They were facing violence in parts of this country, and apartheid policies and things of that nature. So depending on who you were in America, whether or not you had an equal access to the so-called prosperity that existed here. If you were women, you couldn't do certain jobs. If you were Latino or whatever, there was a question whether you'd be hired doing certain jobs. So it was very much an apartheid system. It was very much a feudal kind of hierarchical system, very, very hierarchical system that we had. So there was prosperity, but again, it depends on who you were, right? Okay, let's continue. So now let's move to today and see what we have. This system, here's what I would argue. People are like, this system's bastardized. It's all screwed up. It's messed up. I think I would argue, and this is from a Zen perspective, right, that things work out just about the way they should, that the dynamics that create various outcomes are natural dynamics. And that's how you got to that outcome. And the evidence is that you have the outcome, right? So if you look at today, let me give you an example of what kind of system we have right now. The COVID hits, right? And if you recall what happened, a couple of things happened that were quite interesting. When it first hit, the stock market started to crash. The government did, and that was Pelosi and what's his name? Pelosi and Mitch McConnell and Trump, who claimed to all despise themselves. Excuse me, they claimed they despised each other, absolutely hated each other. They couldn't get together on anything. They came up with this thing called the CARES Act, where they gave a few pence to the people, a few pence, $1,400 or something, and then some additional money for unemployment. And then they gave like $5, $6, $7, $8 trillion to the richest people on earth who didn't need it. It was just a huge transfer of worth. They handed it, and then they shut everything down, right? And there are those who suspect, I don't know if it's true, but an argument has been made I do this. An argument has been made that at that time that the market was crashing, the economy was crashing. There were some nasty indicators, such as the repo market going to hell in October, um, but before the shutdown and lockdowns and all, and that at the time, and I'm just going to throw this out as one of the theories that I heard, that I think there's some argument, there's some, it's worth considering, that the system was crashing, and that when they shut things down, part of it was they had to inject all of this money into the system to keep it afloat, and they had to shut the system down, because if you suddenly throw $5 trillion into the system just like that and start printing money like there's no tomorrow, and you leave the system open, that money will leach out into the system and cause massive inflation immediately. So they had to shut it down to do so that that money wouldn't leach out and cause the massive inflation immediately. Okay. So, but what happened as far as an understanding of capitalism? And this is interesting. We learned that the so-called market, right, stock market, has decoupled from the bricks and mortar part of the economy. How did we do that? Well, let me give you an example. There was a country called GameStop. All of the malls had shut down, and so it didn't look like a good future for them. So a company like GameStop that works from the malls, makes money from malls, was surely a goner. But the price, the stocks went back up. And as soon as the government injected all of that money into the market and said, we will become the lender of last resort for all companies and buy their stocks and things of that nature and buy their bonds, the market went back up, but everything was shut down. Think about this. If you bought Campbell Soup stock in the past, right, it was because you thought Campbell Soup would sell more soups and come up with new soups and do certain things and make more profits and build more Campbell Soup factories. And then the value of the stock would go up because it was directly related to what happened on the ground. But we then learned during the economy that everything was shut down. And companies like GameStop that had no future, the stocks were going up. What did that mean? The stocks of all these companies are going up, and the companies aren't even open. They're not making anything, and they have, God only knows what their future looks like. But the value of the stock still goes up. What we learned was that the government uses money, prints money, creates money, does what they call quantitative easing, which is nothing but throwing money at the companies, and they keep it afloat even when the companies aren't making anything. So at that point, if you buy stocks, you're not buying stocks because you think the company is going to make more money. You're buying stocks because you think somebody else will come along and give you more for the stock than you paid for it. That's not relative to whether or not the company's making money. In fact, the company doesn't even have to be open. The company doesn't even have to exist. If you have the name of a company, and I buy Garland Incorporated and I buy stocks, and somebody comes along and says, I paid a buck a share, maybe somebody will give me two. If somebody will give you two, you sell it. Garland Incorporated doesn't make anything. So what do we have now? People are buying tokens and calling them stocks. They're just tokens, like you're going to a bingo and you buy tokens, or going to a casino and you buy tokens that represent something. And what's the value of those tokens? So now at that point, it becomes obvious that what we don't have is what is under the classic definition. It's not a capitalist economy. It's not based on profits. It's not based on, can a company all of the discussions that we have. Can it innovate? Can it do research and development? Can it come up with new products? Can it expand? Can it do all of these things and make more money? No. The stocks just need to be more value. And we saw that over the course of the recent decades that companies had spent 90% of their profits buying back their own stocks. So now the companies made more profits than ever, but they didn't reinvest it. They didn't pay their people. They didn't do anything. They just bought their own stocks, because the whole thing was make the value of the stocks go up. The people get higher dividends that own the stocks. The people who run the company, whose salary is based on stocks, get more money because the stock is, and who get stock options make more money. So now what we realize Again, the classic definition of capitalism does not apply to the economic system that we're in. Now, let's go one further. Recently, we had, I was working for a company some years back. One of the things I was doing, I was teaching and I was doing Fox, and I had a company that I was working for. Let's go back to, well, the whole thing happened in 2015 or so. And what happened was this company called Apollo Holdings, and it was a multi-billion, I don't know how many, 100 billion, $150 billion company that we come to find out owned all kinds of stuff, owned unbelievable number of real estate companies, this kind of company. So what did they do? They bought companies. They didn't buy companies to improve the company or even to own the company. They bought companies as an investment, and they may make changes to the company, not to make the company better, but to improve the value. So they buy 3 or 4 companies in a particular industry, maybe combine them, maybe gut some of them out to make some profit, etc. And then when they stuck them all together, they'd flip that. It was like flipping houses, right? Buying companies. And what I realized then, and they bought the company, which was a good, strong company, owned by great people that I came to find out during the 2008 crisis. I knew them. They were friends of mine. I mean, not friends of mine, acquaintances. During the crisis, they didn't lay a single person off. They had to cut some things and all. They looked out for their employees, right? It was, the bottom line is a company comes along, Apollo Holding comes along and says, hey, here's 150 million or something, 200 million for your company. They're like, there's like 5 of us that own that. Yeah, we'll take it, right? And then Apollo buys the company and then basically fires a lot of employees, rolls it over into another company, turns it into a terrible hell of a mess, and a lot of people leave. So they didn't buy it to improve the company. So now what we have, again, in this system, that becomes the norm. Apollo, BlackRock, Vanguard, these other companies go out and they buy a bunch of companies and they just flip them. And they don't care about the value of the company. So now, if you're a customer for any of these companies, you're getting poor service, you're getting poor quality goods, you're getting poor everything. Again, that permeates throughout the society. And so now what do we have? Again, let's go back to what we have. Do we have companies that are making things to make a profit or service, goods or services that are quality? No, they are now owned, even the companies, all of these companies out here are owned by investors companies. So now the companies that you buy stuff from on a day-to-day basis are nothing but tools to be flipped. They're not even trying to provide you decent goods and services for the most part. So what happens? So now we have a false fake system, a system where the market, so-called market, is a fraud because it's rigged by the government. It's rigged by the people that run it. If you know anybody who's really deep into the market, they'll tell you the issue in the market is not, it's not only that they don't have regulations, but even the ones that they have are completely and totally unenforced. So the people who run the market know that there's an unwritten set of rules, and those rules maintain hegemony for the super rich. So the real rules for the market means do whatever you do to make sure the super rich run everything and continue to get richer. But then we have a fake set of rules, which is the Security and Exchange Commission, et cetera, et cetera. False rules. What rules are there left are unenforced. So we now are in a society where the market itself, the stock market, is virtually unregulated, and what few regulations are there are unenforced. And there's a real set of regulations beneath them that are simply a fraud, and they're simply there to maintain the super rich keeping everything and getting maximum profits and never being held accountable. And couple that with, because of the way that dynamic operates, you now have corporations that are not designed to create quality goods or services. They're just tools to be flipped. They're just investment tools, your corporation. So we don't get good quality things made or good quality services. That's why we get screwed. That's why when you call and you say, hey, I need help, instead of getting someone that understands your help, you get someone oftentimes in India, oftentimes um, you have trouble understanding the language. Oftentimes they're not well trained. They just have a computer screen that they've been given to click on, and you call and you say, I'm having problems with this working. And they're like, hold on, please. And then they're like, okay. And they start reading like directly from the manual. And you're like, I got the manual in front of me. I need somebody that knows something about it, right? I actually, when I did like some technical work using various kinds of electronic equipment, one of the companies I stopped using, and this was the company that actually had the best, most reliable equipment, but we would be installing some of this stuff, and it wasn't easy. You know, you had to program this stuff, and I would have my people there, and my technicians, and we'd call the company and say, we've done this and this, we're inputting data, and we got the field 4, and it won't allow us to input this in field 4. And the person would be like, thank you for calling. Okay, for starters, have you taken the equipment out of the box? We're like, dude, we're way past that. We've got technical experts here. We've installed everything. However, we are doing this and that. We've gotten a field 4. Okay, now that you have taken everything out of the box, please uh, test to make sure that the equipment is operating properly by plugging it into the. We're like, geez, I stopped selling this equipment that was the best equipment because when we had a technical issue, we needed somebody that understood that, because we had technicians there, highly trained technicians, and we didn't need some schmuck telling us to plug this shit in. We were already past there, right? Okay, that's what you end up getting. So that's where we are now. Okay, and not that guy's fault. Wasn't his fault. That's what he was trained. He was barely trained, and he was given a computer screen to read from. That was it. Page after page after page. And we deal with this on a day-to-day basis when we call for help from corporations, and you realize you're getting somebody in another country who's poorly trained, but they're doing it because it's so much cheaper. So that's what we have now. Everything is done to save the corporation money, and that's what happens with salaries. The corporation wants to save money, so it wants to pay as little as possible. All of those ramifications are coming back to take a bite out of our society and turning it into the entire West, the U.S. empire, I'll call it, the U.S.-led West. It's turning it into a very dysfunctional economic society that doesn't work. And ultimately, what happens is, as it doesn't work and as the people are suffering, you have to lie and bamboozle them to get them to believe that it's their own fault. Well, if only you did things. Well, this system's not rigged. Why? If only you did everything right, then it would work. It must be you. And so we have a culture that does two things. It blames the individual for not being successful in a system that's wholly, completely, and fully rigged against that person, rigged for the billionaires. So we have to work to convince people that in a system that's totally rigged, that their inability to navigate that system and be successful in that system is not the fault of a rigged system. It's the fault of themselves. They don't have the intellectual and the moral wherewithal to do what they need to do to be successful. So that's where we are as far as this system. That's what I would say about capitalism to start off. I know that was, wow, 33 minutes. Okay, let us continue. And don't forget, let me put this in here for anyone who can. I'm going to put it in. Go follow me on Rockfin. Go try to follow me on Rockfin. Watch this on Rockfin, because again, one of those corporations is up to no good is Google, and I'm hoping that I can get people moved over to Rockfin, and we can have a lot of fun on there, and we can have some success there. Remember, Rockfin, you can subscribe to my channel on Rockfin for free if you choose, if you can afford it. $9.99 a month would be great. You pay that, and once I start putting up premium stuff, you can get the premium stuff that, you know, for members, and not just me, any of the channels on Rockfin. If you pay that $9.99 a month, you can get premium for anybody, but you don't have to. You know, if you can't afford it, just become a subscriber. Also, if you can, go to my Patreon page and become a Patreon member. And if it's $1, if it's $3, $5, $100, whatever you can afford a month will help me to work on getting my independent media website and channel rolling. All right, let's continue. Let us continue. Neoliberalism. Neoliberalism to me, so we've talked about capitalism in a broad sense. Neoliberalism to me is a combination of the economic system and the cultural system that maintains it. Let me just say this about neoconservatism. If we say this system that we have, because remember, when you say neoliberalism or neoconservatism, you're not telling me what the system is. You're giving me a description of the system. Let me explain what I mean. In Zen, one of the things that we say is you don't know who you are, right? That you don't know, who am I? I'll never know. Why is that? If somebody says, who are you? And I say Garland, I'm not Garland. Garland is a name that describes me. I could go to court and change my name to Mike, and then I'd be Mike. Why would I be Mike? But Mike is still not me. Mike is telling you who I am. Mike is telling you the term to use when you're talking about me, the reference, Mike. What happens if I change my name to Pillow? You'd have to say, hi, Pillow. Pillow, whatever word I give you is the term you use to describe me. Now, if you say, who are you, Garland? And I say, well, I'm a journalist. That still doesn't tell you who I am. Journalism is what I do. Garland refers to me, but who am I? Who is this person that we only have words to refer to? That's ineffable. You can't describe it with words. Ultimately, what we come down to in Zen is you can't know who you are. You can only use words to describe yourself. And then Zen argues we are it. We're everything. We're the entire universe where all of reality is who we as human beings are. And we're just trying to use words to describe that. But we are that also. Okay. When we talk about neoliberalism and neoconservatism, we're describing something. Neoliberalism, neoconservatism. I wouldn't have to have this discussion and wouldn't be motivated to have this discussion if we knew what the hell we were talking about. And if that thing couldn't change. So neoliberalism, people say, I hate neoliberalism. They think they're calling it, they're describing something that they don't like, or neoconservatism. So here's what I have to say. Why did I say all that? Neoconservatism and neoliberalism are the expression of this thing. Neoliberalism being the economic and cultural expression of it. Wokeism is a cultural expression of it, right? Neoconservatism is the militaristic, expansionist, foreign policy expression of this beast that we're talking about. And all the beast is this. It's a self-serving racket. It is a scam so that the rich and powerful people can maintain their power and maintain their wealth and increase their power and increase their wealth. That's the scam. Neoliberalism describes that scam. Neoconservatism describes that scam. And even now the word capitalism describes that scam because that's what we're calling this scam. We could call it something else. You have people, you know what's funny? You have people that say, I hate communism or socialism, and everything they hate, they call it socialism or communism. Clearly, the Biden administration is the furthest thing you could ever find from socialism or communism. In fact, the Biden administration, what do? Venezuela is a socialist country. Cuba is a communist, run by the Communist Party. It's a socialist country. China's a socialist country. Nicaragua is a socialist country. What are they trying to do? They're trying to overthrow all of the socialist countries. So what sense does it make to say they're socialists when they're trying to overthrow any socialist country they can find, as the U.S. always has? But if you don't know what the hell they are, because you've never stopped to define this beast, then if socialist or communist is a word that you hate, you'll just call it that. If you hate broccoli, you might call it broccoli. It just means I hate this. I've been trained to hate this word, this term, anything that this term implies to. I don't know what that is. I don't even know what the hell socialism and communism means, much less capitalism. So I'm just going to call it this. So the people who hate capitalism will say Biden and those people are the worst. They're capitalism. That's what capitalism gets you. The people that hate socialism will say, but there he goes. He's a socialist. That's what socialism brings you. But they never stop to define what the hell they're talking about. And again, neoliberalism, neoconservatism, call it what you want. You sooner or later got to figure out what this beast is. Right now, oftentimes I refer to the tuna, the famous football coach for the New York Giants, who said you are what your record says you are. So this beast, if we want to understand it, we got to look at its record. Okay, let's continue on. Let me add this. If you talk about slavery, right? Talk about slavery for a second in the context of this. What is it? What is it? It was the US empire saying, we want, at the time, they were a budding empire and they were still part of the British Empire, right? And here's what they were saying: we want to take resources from other countries and bring them here. Labor is a resource. All slavery was nabbing free labor, nabbing resources from other countries that happen to be people. But really, it was an economic move. We want free labor. We'll bring them over here. Boom, we don't have to pay them. The slaves suffered the most horrific abuse. The white people in the South and throughout the US actually economically suffered too, because free labor, an abundance of free labor, drove down the prices of other labor so they could be treated horribly too. Something that you might want to know. When Harriet Beecher Stowe wrote Uncle Tom's Cabin, which was an attack on slavery, right? On the system of slavery. It was a moral attack on the system of slavery, not really an economic. You'll notice that in the US, what you didn't see was economic attacks on the system of slavery. You saw moral attacks on the system of slavery, but not economic. One of the things that happened was interesting. The Southerners, right? The Southern planters, the Southern oligarchs, then embarked on, a lot of people don't talk about this, then embarked on a rhetorical attack on capitalism, the first powerful rhetorical attack on capitalism. Because remember, we were early in the industrial age, the Industrial Revolution. So there were these giant factories being built in the North. You heard about the factory town, right? They very much abused their workers. They were the Amazons of the day, and the town would build everything, and it would have a company store. The company would build everything. They built housing. You could live there. You bought your stuff from the company store on credit, and at the end of the month, you owed the company store more money than you had made. So it was a scam, right? And if you think about it, it was similar to slavery in that the lowest form of capitalism, the most abusive form of capitalism at that time, was just pure slavery, free labor, and you abuse the laborers in any manner you want, right? The next degree of economic abuse was the company store. And you bring people in. That's why they brought in all of these Italians. That's why they brought in all of these Irish, etc. It wasn't because they were looking out for them. It was because they wanted free labor. It was just a different way of acquiring free labor. Open up, give us your poor and your huddled masses. Why did they want your poor, particularly in your huddled masses? Cheap labor. They bring cheap labor here. They put them to work, and they abuse the hell out of them. They're dying in factories. They're getting their heads yanked off in giant looms, and they're living in poverty. So back to what I said happened. So when and this is a fun discussion. I'm glad I decided to do this. I'm not going to get finished, and I'm going to have to continue this because I'm not going to get as far as I need to do. And this is a discussion I need to have because I'm a reader. I've read a lot and studied a lot. So I can talk about this, probably talk your ear off, but let's continue. Harriet Beecher Stowe. So you've got slavery, the most knuckle-dragging degree of this beast at that time. We're not even going to give it a name, this economic, cultural beast. And there were some cultural things that had to come along with slavery. You had to teach them that this group of people were intellectually, morally, and genetically inferior. Otherwise, people would start asking, hey, is this right? These are human beings. So you had to convince your society that they weren't human beings in order to maintain this economic advantage of free labor, right? And then, of course, you've got the next degree up, which is the factory towns and the abuse of the Irish and all these people coming in and the Poles that you got working in these towns for next to nothing, bringing in this cheap labor and free labor. Harriet Beecher Stowe writes this book, Uncle Tom's Cabin, attacks the South morally. What was never really discussed in America was there was something that happened after that. There was a book that was written by a Southerner called The Northern Planter's Bride. The Northern Planter's Bride, written by a woman who had actually been in a book club with Harriet Beecher Stowe. However, she didn't get Harriet Beecher Stowe's quality of writing. Somehow through osmosis, she didn't get any of that talent because it was a pretty horrible book. But what's interesting is It was the first legitimate attack on capitalism at that time. And it inspired a whole group of, they had a term for it, but there was a number of books written to counter Harriet Beecher Stowe's Uncle Tom's Cabin. And what was interesting about that is Uncle Tom's Cabin was an attack on the morality of slavery. These counter books were an attack, interestingly enough, on the morality of the Industrial Revolution's economic system. Basically, now there were some preposterous things in it. They basically said, well, these black slaves are childlike people who need the white people here to take care of them. And so they implied that as they were raping and murdering and abusing and working these slaves to death, they argued that they were really taking care of a childlike group of people who couldn't take care of themselves. So it was a self-serving bullshit racket. But they went after the North, and they're saying, but those are white people, and look what you're doing to them. So they defended what they were doing from a moral perspective, and it was an absurd defense, but they only had to defend it from a moral perspective because at the time, the anti-slavery movement only attacked slavery from a moral perspective. They never attacked it from an economic perspective. Okay, so isn't that the odd contradictory thing that the North and the anti-slavery people attacked slavery only from a moral perspective, but not from an economic perspective. And in defending themselves, the slave owners counterattacked the industrialists, right? Because the slave owners, the oligarchs, made their money in agriculture using free labor. The industrialists, right? The capitalists in the North made their money in industry, but using cheap, abused labor. Both of them abused their labor. One of them just abused it even more. And it was the agriculturalists who pointed out the contradiction of the moral attack on the agriculturalists for using slaves when the industrialists were doing a different degree of the same thing. Interesting, very interesting, I thought, having studied that stuff and read a lot of books on that stuff. So let's continue. So we get to a point today where I think we're left with a battle between the ruling elite, right? That's Russia and China. We've got two elite factions. One faction, the Democratic Party, they are representing the commodities people, the oil and gas people, right? Russia has oil and gas. They want to take over Russia and take their oil and gas. So that's why the Democrats are like, Russia, Russia, Russia. What does Russia have? It has commodities. It has oil and gas and palladium and gold, right? So that's one faction of the ruling elite. Now, sadly, the idiot sheep in this country are so propagandized that they believe the hype, and they think that Russia and China is really about some kind of a moral standing that the U.S. has taken. That's pretty pathetic. But if you're listening to this, you're probably smarter than that. Now, think about this. Think about the two factions, the hilarious contradiction that the Democrats say we are for to stopping climate change, and meanwhile their focus is on taking the country, getting power from the country that has the gas and oil. Now, then you've got so they're the ones who want commodities, and that's why they want Russia with war with Russia, because they want to take all their commodities. That's that group of really, crazies. Now the others, they have an issue with China, and their issue with China is twofold, and this is why they both hate China and Russia. This is where it comes together. The industrialists, China has industry, And China, they can't compete with China because China is starting to do it better and cheaper and innovate and all the things that they say capitalism should be able to do, because China is about 70% of the economy is owned by the state, and about 30% of it is market owned, is individual owned, right? So they found this kind of hybrid system that's working for them. Whether it continues to work, I don't know, right, for them, but economically it's clearly and obviously working for them, right? And they got buy-in from the people because the culture is different. So the people now, somewhere between 86 and 93%, last check, of the Chinese approved of their government. So you've got these industrialists saying two things. We got problems here because their industry seems to be working better than ours. It's more efficient than ours. We're not going to be able to compete. So the industrialists want war with China because they want to stop this China's industrial machine. The gas and oil and Exxon Mobil's and people that buy gold and uranium and palladium and various iron ore and all that stuff, they want war with China because they want those commodities. It's just that simple. But the two of them do come together in one area, and here's where. And thanks again. I see somebody gave me a $5 tip in Rockfin. Certainly appreciate that. For those who can, let me do this. Please, if you're in the chat in YouTube, click on that and go over. I prefer that you watch it on Rockfin. I'm trying to build Rockfin because you see what's happening with Scary Poppins and the government disinformation board. Anything could happen at any time. And please go over to Rockfin, follow me there, become a member if you can. If you can't, that's okay. Still just subscribe to my Rockfin channel, ROKFIN, and there's the whatchamacallit. Okay. Oh crap! I hate when I do that. I've got ADD and I forget where I am. But at any rate, now okay. So where do these industrialists and the people that want commodities and the people that want to take China over so they can war with China so they can stop the industrial competition and the war with Russia so they can get the commodities? Where do they come together? Here's where they come together. If you've heard me again, you probably have heard this before, but if you haven't, that's okay. Where they come together is this. There's a model that the U.S. doesn't like. And here's the model. The model is, I would call it, if I were running for president, I'd call it the Alaska model. The people in Alaska, what happens? If you live in Alaska, Alaska sells oil, right? And everybody gets a part of it. Every Alaskan person gets a check. You get part of that, right? They would scream and call that socialism. That's what happens in a model in Alaska, which is a red state. What does Russia do? What did Venezuela do? What does Bolivia do, right? What do? They have natural resources. The government nationalizes their oil, gas, their natural resources. The government sells those things. The government then use that money to run the government so they don't have to tax the hell out of you. The government then has a very powerful, a very substantial social safety net. You can go to college and get health care and free houses for the poor and things of that nature, right? A lot of these countries are doing a lot of those programs. And you have very low, if any, taxes in these countries. So there's a model wherein, and what China does is they use their industrial base and they bring money in with that so they don't have to tax the hell out of the people. So what happens? There's a model that says the government doesn't let Exxon Mobil and Chevron and these other companies pump your oil out, pump your gold out, take your timber, all the things that they sell, that these companies don't do it and keep the profit as though it's their own. The government does it. It's the people's money. It's owned, but these resources are owned by the people. So the government's going to sell these things on the market, going to take that money to run the government. And therefore, the people aren't going to be taxed and they'll still have a substantial economic base to keep their social safety net going, right? So where both of the commodities people and the industrial people come together is they don't want Americans to even consider that model because that would cost them dearly. So that's I think where the two come together, as far as I'm concerned. At any rate, I think that's been almost an hour. I think that's as far as I could go because I'm tired. But I hope you enjoyed this. I'm going to do more on neoliberal and neoconservatism. I might come on later on tonight if I have the wherewithal. If not, I'll be back on with the next day or so. But those are my initial thoughts on the issue. I guess really all I touched in was capitalism and a little bit of neoconservatism and neoliberalism. So there's a whole lot more to go. We need to talk about where wokeism fits in. to this, how where culture fits into this, and how you maintain a system that is not benefiting the people in the system. We don't have peace and prosperity. We can't have peace and prosperity with this system. And as I said, I don't need a name for it. I don't need socialism. I don't need capitalism. I don't need any isms to name it. Wokeism, whatever. Who knows? Those are all descriptions of the system. That's not what the system is. I'm not even sure what the hell the system is, but we need to continue to not to describe it with simplistic terms, but to understand what it does and how it works and what it produces and why, to understand that it doesn't work in our best interest. And Sean Moon says plutocracy. Some people say kakistocracy, a kakistocracy wherein the most corrupt and inept people in your society run the society. Some people, I've heard gerontocracy, where you've got people very, very old who are running the system. And you can, again, we're describing it. We're not talking about what it does and what it produces and how it produces that. And that's the discussion we're going to have. I will continue. Follow me on Rockfin. You put the stuff back in. You can email me at Garland Nixon. Follow me on Twitter. Excuse me. You can email me garlandin@gmail.com, at Garland Nixon on Twitter. Please, if you can afford to help, patreon.com/Garland Nixon. Definitely go over to my Rockfin, ROKFIN. Definitely go to my Rockfin page and become a member. I'm really enjoying being on Rockfin, and I want to, do some exclusive stuff on that. And we'll go from there. Someone says, I like what Public Enemy called it, the evil empire of everything. My favorite thing about Public Enemy is the way they use language. For instance, they had a greatest hits album and they called it Public Enemy's Greatest Misses. So they were hilarious. As Flavor Flav said, right? Don't believe the hype. And I think that's it. I appreciate it. I see somebody gave me a $5 tip over on Rockfin. I certainly appreciate that. If you can afford to do tips on Rockfin, if you can afford to do super chats, I certainly appreciate that. That helps it. All of that money is going into getting my website up, keeping it going. A few bumps in the road here and there with the website, but we got it back up. And I hope this week to start posting, putting things up, put all my videos up on it, to put my to write some original articles. And one of the things I'm going to do is I'm going to request that the people who are watching this show write articles, and I'm going to post them on my website. So hopefully next month we'll get that going, and I'll get some of you people writing articles. I'll get some of you people making great comments, and on my website I will put up some of the really good comments. I think that'll be really good too, so I can have people who are part of this media thing, whatever it is. We'll come up with a name. So we can have people that are part of this, enjoy it and contribute, and we can have a great big family and all that kind of stuff. Thanks. Chicken Patty, Pat Hacker, Coop W. Oh my gosh. So many of my friends, Reckless Abandon, they've been around for a long time. I appreciate all of you guys. I appreciate what you do. Share it. Smash the like button, as Alex Christoforus always says. Smash that like button. So the algorithm won't be able to completely wipe us out. Share it on all of your social media platforms and have a wonderful day. Peace. I'm out.